Um, After 1980, I um, I worked. I got an offer in 1980 from Blood Systems uh, after their medical head, or which was called the Executive Vice President for Medical Affairs, uh, was basically fired. And Hale Randolph called me in about July of 1980 uh, whether I might be interested in the job. And um, I said I'd be interested. Unfortunately, I've signed a contract in the Public Health Service for another year, uh, which would not be finished till June '81. And Hale very kindly said he had seen some of my work at FDA, that I could deal with the community quite well, and if I would consider it, he would hold the job open.
Wow.
He took it upon himself to come to Phoenix because he knew me from Albuquerque. In fact, he was the one who interviewed me for my oral licensure when I came to New Mexico.
Small
And
community.
he was a wonderful person, and he basically convinced me to take the job, and which I did. But the one thing, there were two things I want to add to this segment. One, we started out by saying that I left Albuquerque, but I had loved teaching, being in academic medicine, having academic medical colleagues, and really facilitating the learning in a field that I loved, of medical students, of residents, of other physicians. And in retrospect, the favorite part of my very varied career, which involved academic medicine, uh, government, and finally the private nonprofit sector, was enriching in many ways. But for me, teaching and seeing patients, interacting with patients, was the highlight of my career, and I loved it. I'd like to end by one other thing, one other little vignette that comes to mind. I mentioned the Seidels, and that we became friends with them. When they visited us in Bethesda, they stayed with us. They borrowed our car, as I recall, to drove to the Grand Canyon. They loved Arizona, and they came back. And then he became president of the International Society of Blood Transfusion, which met in Munich in 1984. And he invited Eve and me to stay with them in no, not with them, to visit their summer home in Mittenwald, Germany, which was near the castles of Ludwig II, and near the Italian border. And from there we hiked the Wendelspitze, as I recall, and we went to Venice and noted the difference as we crossed the border from clean streets to dirty streets, but loved our visit there. Then I went from there to Munich, and Eve went home, and I stayed with the Seidels for a day and became very friendly with their children.
Christian and Julia.
Christian and Julia. And an interesting thing had happened. A few weeks before, the program Holocaust, which was a series that played in the early 80s in the United States. It was the episode of two families, the Weiss family, which was Jewish, and a non-Jewish family. Uh, what was his name? The Horst family, I think, but I'm not sure. But it showed their personal lives and how the two then finally interacted, where uh, the German became an officer in a concentration camp, where the Weiss family finally ended up. And this show was shown in Germany about a few weeks before I came to Munich. To came from Munich to Frankfurt, or the suburb of Frankfurt where the Seidels lived, and I stayed with them. And they talked about the Holocaust. The two kids, Christian and Julia, they had not been exposed to that before, and this was the 1980s. And they felt like damaged goods. And here I was, a German refugee, showing that that they were not damaged goods, that guilt cannot be inherited, but the memory has to be kept alive. And what the kids did, actually, I didn't tell that as completely as I should have. What happened after the German kids saw this program, the program mentioned the various cities where concentration camps were, or collection centers were in Germany, where there were initial experiments as to how to exterminate Jews, where they first used trucks, other things, and they went, and they also, and so the high school students interviewed citizens of the various communities mentioned in this Holocaust series. And they reported that at first everybody in the communities denied everything. They knew, they said, we didn't know anything about it. The kids knew that there were smells, that there were activities that couldn't have escaped the population. And so they went back multiple times. And finally, these are German high school kids, had a program on radio which I listened to, where they said, finally the population said, yes, we knew about it, but by that time it was too late to do anything about it. And the important lesson from that is that if a wrong exists, you must do something about it early before it becomes so overwhelming that it is unable to change. And that's a lesson that society needs to learn continuously and hasn't learned yet. But the friendship with the Seidels continued throughout the years. We had a wonderful time with them in Vienna, which after our bike trip in Austria, we met them in Vienna. They showed us Vienna, which they knew inside and out, and we had 3 wonderful days with them.
I stayed with them when I went to Europe after the Athens trip. I stayed with them for a few days. I remember visiting a castle that had this sort of pharmacology, ancient pharmacology thing. I'm not sure exactly where that was, and we explored that area. And I stayed in their house. They were lovely. Their kids were about my age. I think Christian was a little older. Yulia maybe a year or two younger. And the one other very funny thing about my stay there was that one day they ordered pizza and they asked me what I liked, and I said anything except anchovies. Well, we had a translation problem because the pizza I got was an anchovy pizza. But I still remember them with such warmth. They just
That's
are a
fun.
wonderful, wonderful family.
And I love anchovy.
I know, it's ironic. You should have been there to eat it. I just carefully peeled them off.
Did the children speak English?
Yes. In fact, everybody but Anna Lee spoke very good English.
Anna Lee understands but doesn't speak.
And this is
And would have been 1979.
this
yes.
would have been
Summer of
that you
79
stayed with
that I
them.
stayed with them.
And then we visited in '84.